A giant new film just retold Homer's Odyssey. A father and son separated by a journey. A disguised guide who isn't what he seems. A monster. A long road home. Almost 2,500 years ago, a Bible book told a strikingly similar story. A father and son. A disguised traveling companion. A monster in a wedding chamber. A dog that remembers. Except this book isn't in most Bibles. It's the Book of Tobit, and depending which Bible is on your shelf, you may have never read it at all. The story opens in Nineveh, where a devout Jewish exile named Tobit has spent his life quietly performing good deeds, burying abandoned bodies, and giving to the poor, even when it puts him at risk. According to the text, this generosity is genuinely dangerous under the Assyrian king he serves. When the king begins executing Israelites and leaving their bodies unburied as punishment, Tobit secretly retrieves and buries them anyway, in keeping with Jewish burial law, and is forced into hiding when his actions are reported. His fortunes collapse regardless. Bird droppings fall into his eyes while he sleeps in his courtyard, and he goes blind. Poor, humiliated, and dependent on his wife, Tobit prays for death. At almost the same moment, in a different city entirely, a young woman named Sarah is praying for the exact same thing. According to the story, Sarah has been married 7 times, and each husband has died on their wedding night, killed by a jealous demon named Asmodeus, before the marriage could ever be completed. Her own household has started to suspect her of murdering them herself. 2 desperate prayers from 2 households that don't yet know each other are described as reaching heaven on the same day. According to the text, God responds by sending the archangel Raphael down to fix both problems at once, though neither Tobit nor Sarah is told that yet. What sets the plot moving is far more ordinary. Tobit remembers he once left a large sum of money with a business contact in a distant city, and he sends his son, Tobias, to retrieve it. Tobias needs a travel companion for the journey, and the man who turns up offering to guide him is, according to the story, the angel Raphael, now walking around introducing himself under a human name, Azariah, with no mention of who he actually is. Scholars generally date the Book of Tobit to somewhere between 250 and 175 BCE, based partly on the fact that it shows no awareness at all of the Maccabean revolt or the Hellenistic crisis that convulsed Judea a little later in that century, events a text written afterward would almost certainly reflect in some way. Its original language was most likely Aramaic, composed by a Jewish author writing from within the Eastern diaspora, drawing on older folk motifs about guardian spirits, grateful burial, and dangerous demons that circulated across the ancient Near East. For centuries, the earliest complete versions available to scholars were Greek translations preserved in the Septuagint, along with a Latin version produced by Jerome. That changed in 1952, when Aramaic and Hebrew fragments of Tobit turned up among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. 4 Aramaic copies and 1 Hebrew copy, eventually published in full in 1995. Their significance is hard to overstate. They confirmed that Tobit wasn't a late Greek invention dressed up as ancient scripture. It was a genuinely old Jewish text, copied and apparently valued by the very community that hid the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves above the Dead Sea in the first place. That detail matters for how this story is usually classified on this channel. Tobit isn't a fringe, late invention competing for a spot in the Bible. It's an authentically ancient Jewish text that some communities read as scripture, and others in the end did not, which is a very different kind of exclusion than a text simply being rejected outright. The Qumran fragments also settled a long-running scholarly disagreement about which surviving translation was more faithful to the original. 2 different Greek versions of Tobit had circulated for centuries, a shorter one and a noticeably longer, more detailed one, and translators disagreed for generations about which better reflected the lost original text. Once scholars could line the Aramaic and Hebrew fragments up against both Greek versions, the longer Greek text turned out to match the Qumran fragments far more closely, confirming that the fuller, more narratively detailed version most modern Catholic and Orthodox Bibles now use is also the one sitting closer to the book's actual ancient roots. Here's where the comparison to Homer actually holds up, and it's worth being precise about what kind of claim this is and isn't. Nobody credible argues that the author of Tobit had read the Odyssey, or that Homer had read Tobit. The two works come from different cultures, probably different centuries, and there's no known channel by which one could have directly influenced the other. What some literary scholars have pointed out instead is a set of shared narrative shapes, patterns that show up independently in ancient storytelling traditions across the Mediterranean and Near East. The clearest one is the pairing of Tobias and his guide Azariah with Telemachus and Mentor in the Odyssey's opening books. In Homer's story, the goddess Athena disguises herself as an old family friend named Mentor to guide Telemachus, Odysseus's son, on a journey to find news of his missing father. In Tobit, the angel Raphael disguises himself as a human relative named Azariah to guide Tobias on a journey to recover his father's fortune, and without either of them fully realizing it at first, to fix everything else broken in both families along the way. Other details echo further. Tobias's journey includes an encounter with a dangerous river creature, a great fish that attacks him at the Tigris, before Raphael instructs him to use its organs as both a demon repellent and a medicine, not unlike the monstrous obstacles Odysseus meets on his own water-based travels. And when Tobias finally returns home, one of the story's most tender details is a dog, present as his companion throughout the whole journey and mentioned again at the homecoming, an image some readers have compared to Argus, Odysseus's own aging dog, who alone recognizes his master after 20 years and dies just after seeing him return. Scholars who study these parallels are careful to describe them as evidence of a shared ancient storytelling grammar, common building blocks like the absent father, the disguised helper, the perilous crossing, and the recognition scene at homecoming appearing independently in Greek epic and Jewish religious narrative alike, rather than proof that either text is quietly rewriting the other. It's less a hidden connection and more a shared human instinct for what a journey story needs to feel true. Folklorists studying Tobit separately have long connected its plot to a widespread story pattern, often called the Grateful Dead motif, where a character who honors the burial of a stranger is later helped, sometimes without knowing it, by a supernatural figure connected to that same act of kindness. Versions of this pattern turn up across medieval European folk tales, well outside any biblical or Greek tradition, which is one more piece of evidence that Tobit is drawing on very old, widely shared storytelling instincts, rather than inventing something in isolation. Seen that way, the Odyssey comparison isn't really about Tobit and Homer specifically, it's about how many separate ancient cultures kept reaching for the same handful of story shapes to talk about loss, danger, and coming home. If Tobit is old enough to sit among the Dead Sea Scrolls and was translated into Greek and later Latin as scripture, why doesn't every Bible include it today? The answer runs through two overlapping canon traditions. The Greek Septuagint, widely used by Greek-speaking Jewish and early Christian communities, included Tobit. The later Hebrew Masoretic text, which became the standard for Rabbinic Judaism, did not. When Jerome was commissioned in the 4th century to produce a Latin translation of the whole Bible, the work that became the Vulgate, he worked mainly from Hebrew texts for the Old Testament and was reportedly reluctant to include books like Tobit that lacked a Hebrew original he trusted. According to his own preface, he ultimately included a Latin version of Tobit anyway, translated with the help of an Aramaic copy, but placed it in a different category from the core Hebrew scriptures. The Catholic Church formally affirmed Tobit's place in Scripture at the Council of Carthage in 397 and reaffirmed it at the Council of Trent in 1546 in direct response to the Protestant Reformation. Protestant reformers, working from the principle that the Old Testament should match the Hebrew canon used by Jewish communities, removed Tobit along with several other books, including Judith, Wisdom, Sirach, Baruch, and the books of Maccabees, grouping them as the Apocrypha rather than Scripture. Eastern Orthodox churches, meanwhile, kept Tobit as canonical, much as they did with several other texts this channel has already covered. Martin Luther's own position adds a useful wrinkle here. Rather than discarding Tobit entirely, Luther placed it and the other disputed books into a separate Apocrypha section of his German Bible, describing them as good and useful to read even though he didn't consider them equal to Scripture, a middle position that later Protestant Bibles often dropped altogether by removing the Apocrypha section completely. The result is a book that is, right now, simultaneously Scripture and non-Scripture, depending entirely on which denomination's Bible happens to be sitting on the shelf, not because anyone doubts it's ancient, but because of where different traditions drew their canon boundaries centuries ago. It's a strange kind of coincidence that a story this old is suddenly this relevant again, simply because a modern film happened to retell its much more famous cousin. But that timing says something real about why these narrative shapes persist. A father waiting for word of his child. A young person sent into the world with a stranger who turns out to be more than he appears. A dangerous crossing. A homecoming that heals more than anyone expected. Cultures separated by language, geography, and centuries kept independently reaching for the same story, because it keeps describing something true about leaving home and returning changed. Tobit's version adds its own distinct texture. Its guide isn't a trickster god or a war hero. He's an angel who spends most of the story pretending not to be one, quietly repairing two broken households before revealing at the very end exactly who he was all along. That's really the invitation this bonus episode leaves behind. The next time a blockbuster retells an ancient epic, it's worth asking what quieter, older version of the same story might be sitting one shelf over, canonical in one tradition and apocryphal in another, waiting for someone to notice the resemblance. This has been a special bonus episode tied to a moment when an old story suddenly got a lot more attention. The regular series continues next with the planned next episode, The Gospel of Philip, a Nag Hammadi gospel built around riddles, sacraments, and a debated description of Jesus and Mary Magdalene's relationship. If you want to keep discovering the texts that almost made it into the Bible, subscribe. There's a lot more of this history still buried.